episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a solo episode that I think is going to be really helpful for people. If you get injured, you can't train for a little bit due to an injury, or again, we could even use this for if you can't really train for a couple weeks. What are some nutritional strategies that we can do, and lifestyle strategies, and even some training strategies to make sure we minimize muscle loss during this time? And I'll go over some things that may be realistic and not realistic on there. But first, before I dive into that, if you are interested in body recomp, what it is, how to do it, 10 things you need, the 2 different types of body recomp, then my free body recomp checklist is for you. So make sure you go and check that out. The link to that is in the show notes and it's completely free there. So make sure you go and grab that. So cool. So this topic I want to go over today, I think will be really interesting for people, right? Unfortunately, at some point in time, we're either going to have to take a break from training for whatever reason. Maybe we have to get some surgery. Maybe we got injured and we can't train for a little bit. And what do we do in that situation? I feel like I've heard things both where it's like nutrition can help you mitigate muscle loss. And on the flip side, you've also heard people say, oh, it doesn't really matter. You're not going to be able to train. You're going to lose some muscle. And I think there's some truth in both of those. And so we're going to dive into the context of that and some things that we can do from a nutrition standpoint, a training standpoint, and a lifestyle standpoint to make sure that you minimize muscle, right? Because I feel like people fall into a few camps here. One, they think that if they can't train, they're just going to lose all their hard work and they're just going to go completely backwards. And this kind of gets people to spiral out of control. It can really put them into a negative mindset. And again, even if it's an injury that maybe you can still do some things, it still does weigh on people. And they just think they're going to lose all their hard work and they get down. And I think that bleeds into other aspects of things there. Again, that's one thing that will happen. You also see people don't really worry about it. They're like, hey, you know what? All my muscle is going to come back super quick. And so I'm not going to worry about it. And so they don't really do anything that helps, one, speed up recovery, but also can help potentially mitigate muscle loss. And then the other one is just simply they just get to the point where they don't do anything that in these things can help speed up the potential recovery process, right? So you have people all over the spectrum in terms of what may happen during this time. And what I will say on this though is muscle is tough to come by. We really should try to mitigate as much muscle loss as possible. Again, but definitely you're going to be able to gain it back relatively quickly, but it's still not going to be super fast. Like it's going to be faster than when you initially built it, but it's still going to take some time, right? So again, the thought is being, if we can reduce how much muscle we lose during this process for whatever reason, right? However long you can't do things, train, or whatever it may be, the less muscle we lose, the shorter you can get back to where you were at before. Plus, muscle is going to help a lot of different things. It is going to be very helpful from a metabolic health standpoint. So if we start to lose a lot of muscle overall, like we can start to see some things become problematic there. And so, yeah, and then having a good base of muscle and fitness coming into it helps, one, with the recovery process, but then on top of it, the more muscle we have going into it, the bigger that reservoir is, to where if you do lose some muscle, you're still going to come out like you're still going to be in decent position, even if you do lose a little bit of muscle. So I definitely think your baseline amount of muscle coming in is super important. So that just really goes to show the importance of making sure that we're doing what we can to build some lean body mass at some point and at least maintaining it over time, right? Because if something like this were to happen, obviously that can become problematic, right? And we obviously see people that just lose muscle naturally as we age, for people that don't stay active, don't weight train. And then obviously there's just the age-related muscle loss, sarcopenia, right? That can happen as well too. Big picture context here. One, like the goal is we're likely not going to be able to preserve 100% of muscle, right? Like we need that stimulus to maintain muscle. I don't want people to think that this is a thing where you're going to be able to maintain all of your muscle if you can't use certain muscles for extended periods of time. As we'll dive into the context, the good news with this is, and this kind of comes back to the first mistake, and they both end up being the same thing here, where people don't end up training. They don't do anything because they're injured. They don't really focus on nutrition strategies, and they end up losing muscle elsewhere. When we are able to maintain some muscle, like we can still train uninjured muscle groups. We just have to be smart about it there. But again, if we're not getting that stimulus to the target, to a certain muscle, right? You're likely not going to be able to maintain 100% of your muscle. The longer we can't train or use a muscle, the more likely we are going to be to lose some tissue. And so I am going to reference a paper here throughout as I believe it was a review. I don't know if it was a meta-analysis, but I think it was a review on strategies. And basically, again, they make the point in this paper, and this is strategies to maintain skeletal muscle mass in the injured athlete. Limb immobilization, so we're not using the limb following injury, leads to rapid muscle loss and declines in functional capacity, right? Not only do we lose muscle, but then we also lose that functional capacity. And then they say too, muscle loss is most profound during the first 1 to 2 weeks of limb immobilization. And as they mention here in this paper, a time period where countermeasures are not conventionally considered a priority for the injured athlete, right? Really, we're looking at the most important part is going to be that first 1 to 2 weeks of limb immobilization there, right? If we can implement these things as soon as possible, we're going to be in a better position there because that first 1 2 weeks seems to be crucial in this process. And remember, like we're also looking at some of these things around muscle loss or complete disuse, right? So there may be certain injuries where you could potentially use it, right? So use certain muscles that maybe, which this is all going to be about the volume at which you could do. So just keep this in mind that some of these studies about muscle loss are essentially complete immobilization where you're not using them at all. So there's a spectrum on what we can do, right? You're definitely not going to be able to train as hard, but can you still get up and do things? Because that is going to still help maintain some muscle, especially if we also combine it with these things that we're going to discuss today. And so what we're going to talk about today is really meant to offset muscle loss and slow atrophy. It's not going to be a complete, hey, we're going to keep it all. I've probably said that multiple times now. You're probably sick of me saying that, but I think it is important to make that known. And the paper didn't really cover too much lifestyle stuff, so I'm going to add that in. So some of this is going to come from the paper, but also just things that I wanted to add in and things that I would do if a client couldn't train. So I think one of the most important things that we need to look at is energy balance. We need to focus on energy balance. So that when we're recovering, we just get injured. I think the best thing we can do is try and find energy balance. We don't want to aggressively diet while injured because being in a deficit will slow recovery and it can potentially accelerate muscle loss, especially in the areas that we are not able to use and train. So if you're trying to push a fat loss phase, it's probably not the time to push that. I think we can make a case for some situations where it's a very small deficit, depending on where you're at from a body composition standpoint. But for most people, like the best case scenario is we get to energy balance. And we'll talk about how that could potentially change because of activity levels switching, right? Or changing up. But a deficit is going to slow recovery for one. It's going to accelerate muscle loss. And a deficit is another stressor on the body. And so when we're trying to recover from an injury, like we really want to take as much stress load off the body as possible. And dieting induced stress and body comp induced stress is definitely a lever that we would want to pull in this situation, right? Because that's not a stressor that we need, right? Like obviously higher levels of inflammation, the recovery process, like recovering from an injury, like those would be stressors on the body that we obviously would want to prioritize during that time. And then all basic bodily functions, changing your body composition falls lower on that list. So this is not the time that we want aggressive diet aggressively from a fat loss perspective. We're just going to likely increase that muscle loss, especially in the unused limb. Then if we're not training on top of it, like that's also going to impact things, right? Because I could see a lot of people where they get to this point and they're like, I need to be in a deficit because I don't want to gain body fat. And again, that can be problematic from that standpoint. And now in saying that, large surpluses can increase fat gain without helping recovery. We do want to make sure that we're also not pushing a large surplus because now we could be pushing fat gain and that's obviously not going to help with recovery as well too. And then that's going to be body comp change that you're going to have to do later. You're going to have to push a deficit later at some point. And so again, we also don't want to be in a large surplus. There's that point of diminishing returns with energy balance that's going to help with recovery. I definitely think that you don't want to be in a deficit, but I think once we find energy balance, that's going to be the sweet spot there. So the goal is to get to that point. You can use estimated maintenance calories if you've used that before. However, where it can get confusing is that energy needs may change if activity and training decrease. And who knows, your energy needs could slightly go up during injury as well too. So these are all things you'll have to consider during that time. And so the best thing is, okay, what can I do? Looking at body weight, making sure it's staying relatively stable, right? You're not seeing huge drops, huge increases, making sure that you're feeling well-fueled, energy levels are adequate, right? These are all things that I would look at. So it's like a combination of looking at your estimated maintenance calories, it's looking at body weight, and then also some biofeedback measures in terms of how you feel, right? I think you should feel satiated. I don't think you should feel extra hungry. Again, so long as like meal timing is correct and things like that. Sleep is solid. You're not waking up in the middle of the night. Those would be from a menstrual cycle standpoint, that's regular. Again, some of these we do have to look at on a longer time frame. So again, that's why I say estimated maintenance calories and maybe slightly undershooting it to start with some of the things we're going to talk about here and then adjusting from there. But also just keep in mind, okay, how different are my activity levels? If you're someone who you do train 6 days a week, you get 15,000 steps per day. And then now all of a sudden you go from that to you're just training once or twice a week or none. And now your steps are at 5,000. You're probably going to see a pretty substantial change in what your maintenance calories were to now. So like you'll have to account for that. But if you're still able to train during this time, just maybe not in the limb that is injured, and your steps go from 15 to 10K and you go from 6 workouts to 3, again, you'll be able to make a little bit of a less adjustment on there potentially. So that's what we're looking at there is energy balance first. All right. So some other things that we want to do, and this is what the paper did mention avoiding the energy balance. I added in some of the extra stuff there, but what they do talk about is protein intake and distribution. So we're looking at roughly 1.6 to 2.5 grams per kilogram of body weight. So that's about 0.8 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight. So really just staying within our normal protein intake is ideal. So we definitely want to make sure we're getting in protein. Like I said, we still, without that training stimulus, we're obviously not going to be able to build muscle. And over time, the longer we go without using that muscle, that limb, you will likely continue to lose muscle in that process. So keep that in mind. But they did also mention though, like that in that first 1 to 2 weeks, that's when it's the most crucial. So definitely making sure you're eating enough protein during that time there. And like I said, 0.8 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight is that sweet spot. And that's what we would recommend most of the time. One thing though we do want to start to pay attention to though is distribution. So try to distribute protein evenly across the day. This again is a typical recommendation that people will give for protein. And so I think it's just continuing to really focus on that. But during this time, really making sure that you're doing that. So trying to avoid skewing all your protein into one large evening meal, right? So if you're eating 4 meals a day at 150 grams, try to get 30 to 40 grams per meal. Eat protein about 4 to 6 times a day, every 3 to 4 hours or so on that. So just make sure we're consistently eating protein throughout the day there. You don't have to do it 10 times a day. It's just, hey, let's make sure throughout the day we're getting some protein. We're not going too terribly long without protein throughout the day, which again is typically what we would say hey, if you're really trying to build muscle, like that's what we want. Again, we're looking at quality, and let's go to timing first. Continue to talk about timing. A high protein breakfast to start your day seems to be super helpful here with this. So making sure that in that first meal, we are getting that high protein, but that comes back to the distribution, right? If we're doing that, spreading protein out fairly evenly, you should hit that. So again, high protein breakfast to start your day. I would probably do that within a couple hours of waking. And then before bed, we can potentially use casein or Greek yogurt because again, Greek yogurt is a slower digesting protein a couple hours before bed. And this can help keep muscle protein synthesis elevated overnight, making sure that we are doing that as well. We could potentially add in some protein 1 to 2 hours before, something like some sort of casein, which is typically in dairy, or casein powder. Greek yogurt would be a solid choice late at night there. And again, we do want to look at quality, right? So any high quality protein is fine. So we're looking at whey, casein, dairy, animal proteins. And then if we are going to be plant-based, we just want to make sure we're getting blended sources in there. Leucine is important, but that usually is going to come from animal products. So potentially supplementing with that or like an EAA during this time could be helpful for people that don't get like a lot of animal protein in. But for plant-based, we definitely want to get those blended sources for sure. And this really is in line with how we would discuss nutrition to build muscle. So nothing really changes from that part, right? But if we come back to what I said initially, a lot of people are going to, hey, I'm not building muscle. I'm not able to actively build muscle. So I'm not really going to focus on these things. So really, if you're in a building phase and this happens, you just kind of keep doing the same thing from a nutrition perspective, except we just might eat a little less calories overall to match energy balance there. From a nutrition perspective, making sure that we are getting a well-balanced diet and we're hitting all our micronutrients. So just making sure you're getting a blend of nutrient-dense foods in, right? We probably don't just want to eat all processed foods, just protein, like getting some other micronutrients in. So we're looking at some fruit and veggie, some sources like oats, beans, stuff like that there that will help us hit that there. So just a wide variety of foods. So hitting our micronutrients, because that will help speed up the recovery process as well too. From a carb perspective, you may need fewer carbs if activity is lower. So if you're that person that I said goes from 15,000 steps a day to 5, and you're going from 6 workouts a day to 2, I still think you need carbs. I don't think you should go to 0 carbs, but you may just need to decrease how much you're having during that time, because carbs will help with recovery and they are anti-catabolic as well too. So they can be helpful when trying to preserve lean body mass. But like I said, the trick is making sure that you don't underdo it, but don't overdo it either. So you may just have to adjust down. And the problem with carbohydrates is it's very independent on the person and their metabolic health. Like it's just hard to give exact carb numbers here. So really take what you've been doing and then slightly adjust if you need to decrease your calories to match energy balance there. So that's really what we're trying to do from a macro standpoint there. I think from a fat perspective, making sure you're hitting your minimums from a fat perspective. I like to have clients hit 30 to 50 grams a day as a minimum. Some will go a bit higher than that, depending on if they like that, if that's the style of eating that we feel is beneficial for them right now. Again, I think fat sources are going to be important, right? Getting things in like some olive oils, avocados, fish through like salmon, some nuts, seeds, like those would be where I'd want to get most of my fats from. Some saturated fat's fine. Some other types of fat is fine. I think making sure we get a good blend of those is, we at least want to make sure we get some of those in there. From a supplement perspective, they did mention HMB. They said it as being potentially anti-catabolic. I think that's optional. I don't ever recommend that to anyone, but that was something that the paper mentioned. But ones that I would recommend and potentially looking at, and these were two that I would recommend for clients, but also they were found in the paper, and that's going to be omega-3 fatty acids. So that making sure we're focusing on DHA and EPA, we're looking at 1,000 milligrams per of each or around there if possible. Legion is supplement from a fish oil perspective that I back. I think it's great. And this can help with inflammation and recovery. And there's some evidence that omegas can help with like muscle loss and can help with the muscle building process for under conditions for people that aren't able to train or in older individuals, right? So I would look at, this is a core supplement that I have clients take anyways, but definitely during the recovery process, making sure you're taking these omega-3 fatty acids there. And then creatine, right? I think the literature's mixed on this. There's some evidence that it can be helpful from a recovery standpoint. And we obviously know that it helps with lean body mass, right? So it can help support muscle retention and recovery. And so I would keep taking creatine during this time, especially if you're someone who eats more plant-based. And then my other core 4 supplements, magnesium glycinate, definitely make sure we continue to take that. Again, that's one that I'm going to recommend for clients to take anyways. And then vitamin D, right? Look at your blood work, but I think during this time, vitamin D does play a role in bone health. And so I think this would be a great supplement to continue to take during this time there. And then I think you can make the evidence for curcumin. I know it helps with inflammation. So potentially looking at curcumin, I've seen it be able to help with pain, right? So if we are experiencing some pain, it can help with that. And we probably want to be careful with that, right? If you're someone who really wants to get back to training as soon as possible, like we have to make sure we don't it's like you want to push yourself, but you don't want to over push yourself and ignore pain either. And then collagen, right? The more I learn about collagen, I think it can be super helpful from a like tendon standpoint, cartilage, injury standpoint. So potentially taking that during that time to help speed up the recovery process. And while it's not a complete protein, it is still going to help you hit your protein. That would be something I would say though, if you do take a big chunk of collagen protein, like just make sure you're still getting in those, the leucine based protein, right? A good blend of plant-based, if that's what you eat. With collagen, my understanding is if you can take this about 45 minutes pre whatever training, if you do some sort of rehab, anything like that with some vitamin C, that can potentially help with the recovery process there with that. Other than that, like EAAs, I think could potentially be beneficial, especially if, like we said, you're somebody who's plant-based, maybe older adults. I think some EAAs during this time could be beneficial there. All right, let's go into what we should do from a training perspective now. So training while injured. So if we can, we want to train uninjured muscle groups. Continue resistance training where medically clear. Like you need to make sure you're medically cleared, right? This is going to help preserve overall muscle mass and metabolic health, right? If we can maintain as much muscle as possible elsewhere, that's obviously going to help overall. So still train the muscles that you can. I think that's super important. So if you have a lower body injury, potentially train your upper body. If it's an upper body injury, make sure you train your lower body there, right? I can't stress that enough, that we continue to train what we can. Like I said, a lot of people are going to get injured and then they just completely get down, or they feel like they can't train elsewhere, or they can't train everything. So I'm not going to do anything. And that's a big mistake, right? Really limiting overall muscle loss, and even potentially limiting, again, if you're not able to use the limb, you're not going to be able to, but there is something that we could potentially do there to at least maintain some strength potentially with that, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. But the big takeaway here with this one is train your uninjured muscle groups if possible. Passive movement and light activity, any contractile stimulus is going to be better than none. So progress to passive movement or low level activity when cleared. So walking is very helpful if you're able to. So we talked about the energy balance side of things, where it can help. Like one of the big downsides is you and they mentioned this in the paper, if you go from training a ton to now you're barely able to move because of whatever injury you have, we run into 2 issues, right? Now your energy balance or your energy output is a lot lower. Now you run into the issue of being in energy balance can be tough because and to hit all your macronutrients. So I think this can be a good thing to help, one, speed up the recovery process, give you some sort of contractile stimulus through walking, and that can help keep your total daily energy expenditure up a little bit to allow us to be able to eat more food and get in the micronutrients and the macronutrients we need for recovery. Now, the key though is you just can't overdo it. You can't be like, I can't train anything. So I'm going to go on I'm going to do 30,000 steps so I don't gain any body fat. And then now it's hard for you to eat the amount of food that you need to. And then now you're in a negative energy balance. And that goes against what we said earlier. So with the movement, you still need to dose it properly there. I think if you can do it, you want to get some cardio in, right? So try and maintain your cardiovascular fitness when possible. It's going to help your metabolic health. It's going to help your overall health. It's going to help your recovery. It's going to increase blood flow throughout the body. It can help increase your total daily energy expenditure. But again, we need to adjust that intensity based on injury and recovery. Same thing with the walking. We don't want to overdo it to like help with body composition. And then now you have a high training output and high energy output. And that's going to slow down the recovery process there, right? So we do need to be careful with it. But I think if we can get some cardio in, again, it's going to help speed up your recovery. It's going to help you feel better. It's going to help with blood flow. And so we want to make sure we include that. They did mention neuromuscular electrical stimulation. Out of my scope, I don't know anything about it, but that was something they mentioned in the paper to get some sort of stimulus to the muscle on there. One thing I did want to quickly bring up is cross-education effect. So basically this is training the uninjured limb can help preserve strength and muscle on the injured side. It's more of like a neural effect, right? So it'd be more strength focused. It's not one-to-one, right? But it can still be beneficial to help offset some strength loss there. And again, it seems like it's more neural than, hey, you're going to maintain muscle. If we can maintain some function in that muscle, that's going to lead to probably better recovery, quicker return, and everything like that. But definitely an interesting phenomenon. So that would be like, hey, if injured, say your left leg, you can't really train. Hey, you could do some calf raises on the right side. That will help maintain that. You could do some leg extensions, single leg stuff, and single leg hamstring stuff, and that would maintain that function in that left leg, at least somewhat there. And obviously same thing with the upper body there. It'd be interesting to see. I don't know if that would transition over to, hey, you can't train your lower body, so you do upper. Would some of that maintain lower body? Probably not. I think it's on multiple limbs, right? So it'd be like your arms and your legs essentially there. But if anyone knows, would love to hear a little bit more about that potentially. And then so next kind of thing I want to talk about is more of the lifestyle stuff, right? What are some things we can do from a lifestyle perspective here? Look, sleep's going to be extremely important for recovery, right? So we are going to want to focus on your sleep and circadian rhythm during this time, right? I think not only is this going to help offset muscle loss, but it's also going to help you recover faster. That's a cool thing with a lot of these strategies is I think they'll do two things. They'll prevent muscle loss or reduce muscle loss, but also help speed up recovery as well too. So key strategies, we're looking at consistent sleep and wake times. So trying to stick to that consistent time there. These are just good circadian rhythm habit practices. So again, trying to go to sleep around the same time, waking up around the same time can help set your circadian rhythm, right? It knows what to expect each day. When we're inconsistent with that, that can throw things off from that perspective. Have a good wind down routine. That's going to help with quality sleep. That's going to help you wind down. You're going to be able to get more deep, restful sleep, which is what we need, right? And that's the same thing with the consistent sleep and wake times. When we're going to sleep, the natural rhythm of your sleep can get impacted and we could potentially be missing out on that deep sleep that we need there. Try to avoid high carb, highly processed meals before bed. So like eating massive meals before bed. Again, it's a body composition thing, but it's also a sleep thing and a digestion thing. Both of those things can go off. And when we look at your body as a whole system, for now, adding in some GI distress into the process, that is going to it can make things work. Like you could have some GI distress because your body's not prioritizing that right now. It's focused on recovery from injury, but also it could steal resources away from recovery and slow down the recovery process, right? If the body deems, hey, we need to take care of this. So just keep that in mind. So it's more the gut thing and the sleep quality. It's not necessarily hey, you're going to gain a bunch of weight if you eat before bed there. Try to limit caffeine too late in the day, right? Too much caffeine overall may slow recovery, but too late in the day will also impact sleep. And so that's going to slow recovery. Try and get some morning sunlight exposure if possible. Again, that's going to help set your circadian rhythm. Plus, it's probably good from a recovery perspective to get outside if you can. So get some morning sunlight or bright light to help set your circadian rhythm. Keep your bedroom cool and dark. And then watch your blue light exposure at night. I think if you can do these things, you're going to offset muscle loss and really speed up recovery. This is probably where a lot of people go wrong from a recovery standpoint there, right? But the key is, yes, ensure that you get about 8 hours of sleep, but also make sure that we're doing things throughout the day that are going to help set up, because we could get 8 hours of sleep and be off on all these things and you're not going to get as much out of your sleep. Hydration is going to be key, right? So making sure you stay hydrated, that's going to help with the recovery process. If we're dehydrated, that's a stressor on the body, and that's going to slow down recovery, right? So we want to watch your overall stress load. So look at things like resting heart rate. Again, resting heart rate may be a little bit higher post-injury and that period of time as you're recovering, right? Body's working a little bit harder, which is a sign that, hey, we need to do things that that means we need to do less elsewhere because our body's already working harder, right? So that higher resting heart rate is going to signal stress. And so we need to make sure we're doing things that are not also increasing our resting heart rate on there. Caffeine's a big one. Not getting enough sleep is going to be big there. We want to monitor overall stress load on the body. So that's just reducing unnecessary stressors, right? So like something like alcohol, that's a stressor on the body. That's going to make things worse. It's going to impact sleep. So that's going to slow recovery. Again, like trying to manage your overall stress as much as you can. Again, sometimes that's out of our control, but we want to try and manage that as best as possible. We're also looking at breath work and nervous system stuff. So slow down your breathing, really focus on nasal breathing, trying to activate that parasympathetic system, your rest and digest system, and this will help speed recovery and it can help with body composition as well too, right? And that to me, that will help limit muscle loss and it will help speed up recovery as well too. So definitely make sure we focus on those things. And then returning to training after injury, start low volume, start low intensity, progress slowly, do not go all out immediately. Like we need to slow down on the return. That's a big thing that I see and if I were injured and like I would want to come back as soon as possible and go back to where I was before, but we have to slowly work our way back up. But again, if we do these things during, you're likely going to be able to get back to what you're doing a lot sooner. And if we train other muscle groups during this time, like those muscle groups should be good to go there. And I guess one thing that I will say is monitoring overall stress load on the body. We would need to watch how hard our training is. You wouldn't want to go balls out on all your cardio. You'd want to watch your recovery, maybe a little bit more zone 2 type stuff versus like super high intensity type stuff from a cardio perspective. And then a training perspective, maybe you're not going to absolute failure on everything that you can train, right? Maybe you are watching that intensity. You're going closer to like 1 to 2 RIR on some things there. So just keep that in mind with that, but definitely don't want to go all out immediately, especially in the injured muscle group there. Like I said, you're likely, the longer we're out, and again, this paper also says that, hey, the first couple 1 to 2 weeks is when you're going to lose the most muscle. So chances are we're going to lose some, but it definitely will come back faster than it was originally built. So keep that in mind, but it still is going to, that's still going to take time. It's not going to come back in 3 training sessions. Like it's going to take some time. So if we can offset as much as possible now and recover as quick as possible, we got 2 things at play here that are going to be a positive. And like I said, having more muscle before your injury is definitely going to protect you because you're just going to have a larger reservoir to pull from there. And more muscle is going to be more resilience and probably a faster recovery in most situations there. So remember, you can't prevent all muscle loss, but we can slow it significantly. We can protect recovery. We can come back faster during this. And so that's what the goal of this was. So hopefully this was helpful. If you guys have any questions on this, just shoot me a message on Instagram, Jeff, HOEHN_. That's where I'm most active on social media. Give me a follow there if you haven't. These are things I work on inside my performance recomp method, my one-on-one coaching program. So if you're interested in this sort of approach and managing overall stress load on your body, really pushing body composition, but also performance, then that's exactly what this program's for. Again, there's a link in the show notes that goes over the performance recomp method, my one-on-one coaching program. So make sure you go and check that out. I am looking to add some clients for February. If you're interested, reach out. We'd love to chat with you about it. And then if you found this podcast to be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, and that will help more people find it. So thanks for listening. I'll chat with you guys soon.